Urgent. Your soulmate just heard shocking news about you. They're still shaking after finding out the truth. My beloved child. Your soulmate just heard something about you that made everything around them seem to disappear for a moment. One sentence. That was all it took. Their expression changed, their hands went cold, and the person standing across from them immediately realized this news had struck somewhere deep. But here is what makes this so unsettling. What they heard was not some meaningless rumor they could easily dismiss. It involved something about you they had quietly wondered about for a long time. Something they never had the courage to ask you directly. At first, they tried to stay composed. They even asked the person to repeat what had been said, almost hoping they had misunderstood. They hadn't. And when one specific detail was mentioned, your soulmate suddenly went silent. Why would that one detail affect them so deeply? Don't skip, because the answer is tied to a moment between you and them that they apparently never forgot. For a long time, your soulmate had been carrying one painful uncertainty. They couldn't tell whether what existed between you was truly as meaningful to you as it was to them. There were moments when they wanted to believe it completely. Then doubt would creep back in. They noticed the things you didn't say, the times you pulled your emotions inward, and the strange distance that sometimes appeared even when the connection itself felt undeniable. But the shocking news they just received changed the meaning of those memories. Someone revealed that during a time when your soulmate believed you had emotionally moved on, you had actually made a private choice that protected what existed between you. You never announced it. You never demanded recognition for it. And apparently, you never expected them to discover it. That is what shook them. Because suddenly, the silence they once interpreted as indifference looked completely different. But there was another part of the story the person hesitated to reveal, and your soulmate noticed that hesitation immediately. They leaned forward and asked one question: what else happened? The answer did not come right away. There was a pause long enough to make your soulmate's heart race, because now they understood this conversation was bigger than they first realized. Finally, the person admitted that your private decision had come with a cost. You had apparently been given an opportunity to choose what would have been easier for you, but doing so could have permanently closed a door between you and your soulmate. And you didn't take it. Your soulmate had spent all this time wondering whether you would ever choose them when it truly mattered, only to discover that you may already have done exactly that without telling anyone. Their eyes filled with emotion, but before they could even process it, another detail surfaced. Something huge is waiting for you, because the person who delivered this news then revealed that your soulmate had misunderstood one crucial event from your past. And when they finally heard what actually happened that day, they whispered your name and began shaking all over again. What they heard next completely changed the memory they had been carrying. Your soulmate had always believed that on that particular day, you deliberately stepped away because your feelings had weakened. They remembered your silence. They remembered waiting for some sign from you that never seemed to come. And little by little, they convinced themselves that they simply hadn't mattered enough. But now they were being told something entirely different. You hadn't stepped away because you stopped caring. You had been trying to keep a difficult situation from reaching them, choosing to carry the emotional weight yourself rather than place it on their shoulders. Suddenly, every confusing detail began rearranging itself in their mind. Your distance wasn't rejection. Your silence wasn't emptiness. And the moment they had secretly blamed you for all this time may have been the very moment you were thinking about them most. But then your soulmate asked the question that changed the entire conversation: why didn't they ever tell me? The person delivering the news hesitated again, and that hesitation made your soulmate even more nervous. Then came an answer they weren't prepared for. You apparently believed that if someone truly cared, they shouldn't have to advertise every sacrifice they made. You weren't looking for praise. You weren't trying to make your soulmate feel indebted to you. You simply made your choice and accepted that they might never know the full story. Hearing that hit your soulmate harder than the original revelation. Their hands began trembling again because they suddenly remembered several small moments when you could have defended yourself, but didn't. Times when they questioned your intentions. Times when they may have judged your silence too quickly. You could have revealed everything then, yet you remained quiet. And now one painful question was circling through their mind: how many other things about you had they misunderstood? Stay till the end, because that question led directly to another revelation nobody in that room expected. Your soulmate wanted proof. Not because they wanted to doubt you anymore, but because what they were hearing felt almost too powerful to accept without seeing something themselves. That was when the person reached for something they had been holding back from the beginning. Your soulmate immediately noticed the change in their expression. Whatever was about to be revealed was different from everything already said. It wasn't another person's opinion. It wasn't speculation. It was something connected directly to that hidden moment from your past. Your soulmate stared at it for several seconds before saying anything, and when they finally understood what it meant, their entire expression softened. The shock was still there, but now something else had appeared beneath it: regret, relief, and an emotion they had been fighting for much longer than anyone realized. Then they noticed one tiny detail that made them look up instantly. Because what they were seeing didn't only prove what you had done back then. It suggested that even recently, you had made another quiet decision involving them, and this time, your soulmate realized they might still have a chance to respond before it was too late. That realization made your soulmate stop thinking about the past and focus on what was happening right now. The newest detail carried a recent date, and that alone sent another wave of emotion through them. Whatever you had done wasn't simply evidence of feelings you once had. It suggested those feelings had survived everything: the confusion, the distance, and all the unanswered questions between you. Your soulmate looked again, carefully this time, searching for some explanation that would make the truth less overwhelming. Instead, they found something even harder to ignore. Your recent choice had protected a possibility between the two of you without placing any pressure on them to respond. You had left the door open, but you hadn't tried to drag them through it. And suddenly your soulmate understood something that made their voice tremble. While they had been waiting for proof that you cared, you may have been waiting for them to feel safe enough to believe it. Then came the part that brought tears to their eyes. Your soulmate remembered a recent moment when they almost reached out to you. They had picked up their phone, stared at your name, and nearly said everything they had been holding inside. But fear stopped them. They worried you might have changed. They worried they had waited too long. Most painfully, they worried that contacting you would reopen something you had already decided to leave behind. Now those fears were colliding with the truth sitting directly in front of them. What would you do if you knew how close they had already come to breaking the silence? Would you understand why they hesitated? Your soulmate suddenly asked whether you knew this information was being revealed to them. The answer was no. You hadn't arranged this conversation. You hadn't sent someone to convince them. They were discovering everything without you even knowing, and somehow, that made the revelation feel even more genuine. But something still didn't make sense. If you had quietly preserved this connection, why had the truth surfaced now? Why today? Your soulmate asked exactly that, and the person across from them became unusually serious. There was a reason this secret could no longer remain hidden. Apparently, something had changed recently, something involving a decision your soulmate was about to make based on the wrong understanding of your past. The person knew that if they stayed silent any longer, your soulmate might walk away believing a story that simply wasn't true. That was why everything had finally been revealed. Your soulmate sat completely still as the meaning sank in. They had been dangerously close to making a choice they couldn't easily reverse. But now that choice was suddenly uncertain. Don't skip, because instead of walking away as originally planned, your soulmate did something nobody expected. They asked to hear every remaining detail about you before deciding what they were going to do next. The request changed the atmosphere instantly. Your soulmate no longer wanted fragments, assumptions, or softened versions of what happened. They wanted the truth exactly as it was. So the person across from them finally revealed the detail they had been protecting most carefully. There had been a moment when someone questioned your feelings for your soulmate directly, expecting you to hesitate. But you didn't. You made it clear that whatever confusion existed between you, your soulmate still mattered deeply to you. The surprising part was what happened afterward. You were given an easy chance to close that chapter completely, yet you refused to make a permanent decision while emotions were unsettled. You chose patience instead. Hearing this, your soulmate covered their mouth and looked away. Because they suddenly remembered doing almost the opposite, convincing themselves they needed to let go before discovering whether you had already let go first. That realization brought a different kind of shaking. Not shock alone. Regret. Your soulmate began replaying conversations, pauses, and missed opportunities that once seemed insignificant. One memory suddenly stood above the others, a time when you tried to say something important, but they changed the subject because they were afraid of what they might hear. Until today, they believed they had protected themselves in that moment. Now they wondered whether they had accidentally interrupted the very truth they had spent months waiting to receive. Was that what they were trying to tell me? Your soulmate asked. The person couldn't answer with certainty, but what they said next was even more powerful. Your actions before and after that moment had remained remarkably consistent. You hadn't behaved like someone trying to erase the connection. You had behaved like someone giving another person room without abandoning what they felt. And that distinction hit your soulmate hard. For several seconds, they said nothing. Then they reached for their phone. Their fingers hovered over your name, but they didn't immediately press anything. This wasn't hesitation caused by doubt anymore. Now they were terrified of saying the wrong thing after finally understanding how much had gone unsaid between you. Should they apologize first? Should they admit what they had believed? Or should they simply ask the question they should have asked long ago? Before they could decide, the person beside them revealed one final piece of information from that conversation, something you had apparently said when nobody expected your soulmate would ever hear about it. Your soulmate slowly lowered the phone and listened. And when those words were repeated, tears finally escaped their eyes, because hidden inside that sentence was the answer to the one question they had secretly carried through every moment of distance between you. Those words were simple, but they landed harder than everything else your soulmate had heard. You had apparently said that you never wanted them to return because they felt guilty, pressured, or afraid of losing you. If they ever came closer again, you wanted it to happen because they genuinely understood what they felt. Your soulmate stared at the floor as that sentence settled into them. All this time, they had interpreted your restraint as uncertainty, when it may have been respect. You could have demanded an answer. You could have forced an emotional conversation before they were ready. Instead, you gave them space, even though that space was painful for you too. And suddenly the question haunting your soulmate changed. It was no longer, did I ever truly matter? Now it was, how could I have misunderstood someone who cared enough to let me choose freely? Their phone was still in their hand. Your name was still there. But instead of contacting you immediately, your soulmate asked for one more thing: tell me exactly when they said that. The answer stunned them. It wasn't from some distant chapter they could dismiss as old emotion. It had been said recently, after a moment when your soulmate assumed you had finally stopped caring. Their breathing changed. They remembered that period clearly because they had nearly convinced themselves to make a permanent decision based on that assumption. Yet while they were preparing to close the door, you were apparently refusing to close it for them. Don't skip. This is where the shocking news became personal in a completely different way. Your soulmate realized the truth hadn't arrived merely to explain your past. It had arrived just before they were about to act on a misunderstanding that could have changed everything between you. Then something unexpected happened. Your soulmate didn't ask anyone what they should do. They stopped looking for reassurance and began trusting what they were finally seeing for themselves. They opened the unfinished message they had almost sent you before, read it once, and quietly deleted it. Not because they no longer wanted to reach you. Because those old words had been written from fear, and fear was no longer telling the whole story. They started typing again. This time, slowly. Carefully. Their first sentence wasn't dramatic. It was honest. But before they could finish the message, the person beside them mentioned something else, one detail about what you had been told concerning your soulmate. Their fingers froze above the screen. Because suddenly they realized you had been carrying a misunderstanding too, and if that misunderstanding was what kept you silent, then both of you may have been waiting for the exact same truth from each other. That possibility changed everything your soulmate was about to write. They immediately asked what you had been told, and the answer made their face fall. At some point, information had reached you suggesting that your soulmate wanted distance and had already decided there was no future worth protecting between you. It wasn't presented as a cruel statement. That was what made it believable. It sounded calm, definite, almost impossible to question. So while your soulmate had been interpreting your silence as rejection, you may have been interpreting theirs as a boundary you needed to respect. Two people carrying feelings neither one fully understood, each believing the other had already made a choice. Your soulmate suddenly whispered, "So they thought I didn't want them?" And for the first time since this conversation began, the person across from them answered without hesitation, "That is what they were led to believe." Your soulmate's eyes immediately returned to the message on their screen. Now they understood why certain moments with you had felt so strange. There had been warmth, then restraint. A connection, then sudden caution. Whenever your soulmate gave the smallest sign of uncertainty, you seemed to step back instead of moving closer. They once thought that meant you weren't willing to fight for them. Now another explanation was staring them in the face. Perhaps you believed stepping back was the respectful thing to do because you had been told that was what they wanted. But one question remained. Where had that information come from? Your soulmate asked, and the answer wasn't a name. Not yet. Instead, they were told to remember a specific conversation from the past, one where they had spoken emotionally about needing time to understand everything. Someone had apparently taken those words and carried a very different version of them back to you. That was when your soulmate began shaking again, because they remembered exactly who had been present during that conversation. They remembered what they actually said, and it was nothing like the message that eventually reached you. They never said they wanted you gone. They said they were afraid of making the wrong decision while their emotions were overwhelming them. Somehow, fear had been translated into rejection. Distance had been translated into finality. And both of you had paid the emotional price for that misunderstanding. Your soulmate stopped typing and looked directly at the person revealing all of this. "Did they ever find out what I really said?" they asked. There was another pause. Then came the answer that changed the urgency completely. Apparently, very recently, you had begun questioning the version you were given. And there was a reason. You had discovered one small inconsistency that suggested your soulmate's true words had never reached you accurately, and what you did after noticing it was something your soulmate still knew absolutely nothing about. The inconsistency was small enough that almost anyone else might have ignored it, but you remembered the details too clearly. You had been told your soulmate wanted complete distance, yet something they did afterward never matched that story. They had quietly preserved something connected to you, something they would have had no reason to keep if they truly wanted every door closed. That contradiction stayed in your mind. Instead of confronting anyone, you began looking back at everything more carefully. You compared what you personally remembered with what other people had told you, and slowly a troubling pattern appeared. Some of the strongest conclusions keeping you apart had never actually come from your soulmate directly. They had come through someone else. When your soulmate heard this, their eyes widened. Because they had made the exact same mistake, believing second-hand explanations instead of asking you what was true. Then the person revealed what you did after recognizing that pattern. You stopped accepting assumptions as facts. You decided that if the truth ever came out, it needed to come directly from the two people who actually lived it, you and your soulmate. But you still refused to force contact, because you didn't know whether reaching out would cross a boundary your soulmate genuinely wanted. That detail broke something open inside them. They finally understood the painful irony. You weren't staying silent because you lacked courage or emotion. You were staying silent because you believed their wishes mattered more than your need for an immediate answer. Meanwhile, They had been waiting for you to prove you cared enough to break the silence. Two completely different interpretations. One enormous misunderstanding. Your soulmate looked down at the unfinished message again, but this time their uncertainty was disappearing.